ranking Georgia's opponents in 2024 from least tough to most tough, from weakest to strongest. I'm going to go down from 12 to 1, talk about this list, talk about which games and why I think are the toughest for Georgia, which ones I think are the gimmies. And right off the bat, I'm not going to waste time. We're just going to put it a tie for last place. Tennessee Tech and UMass, both programs that suffered a bad season last year, losing seasons. I think when it's marginal like this and you're playing a team that is so drastically worse than you, and that's just the case, Georgia is on a different level than UMass and Tennessee Tech. Georgia's on a different level from other big schools I'll talk about later on in this video. But I'll say that the easiest one will be Tennessee Tech. Georgia's just kind of fresh in September, and we'll say that UMass will be the second toughest or the second weakest opponent for them, just because that's coming later in the year. Georgia warmed up. The goal is a little bit more clear at that point, and you can use it as a get-right game for Georgia. I think this Tennessee Tech game will be the easiest early on in Sanford Stadium. After the cupcakes, though, then you look at it, and you've got a lot of big names on this schedule. You got Mississippi State, you got Auburn, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Ole Miss. Tons of big names. I think that the next least tough game would be Mississippi State, right? So you're getting into conference play in this. I think that with the Bulldogs, Jeff Levy, I was just trying to get some information about a couple of these teams that I was less sure about heading into this video. And I just don't know what to tell you about Mississippi State. All this coaching turnover the last couple of years, I looked at their roster and I really didn't recognize names. I just think that they're in too big of a transition right now over the last couple of years. There have been years where Mississippi State is a really good team. You think about 10 years ago when they had Dak Prescott. You think about a few years after that, they had a team to compete. But it's never a team that's that great. This will be in Athens. I'm going to say that Mississippi State will be the 9th, right? Or 10th. So Tennessee Tech, UMass, then Mississippi State. You go down the list. Number 9, the 9th toughest opponent for Georgia. I think it's going to end up being Florida. I think that game down in Jacksonville is all the way down at 9 for me on this list. I know it's a tough rivalry game, but this Florida team is just not great. I think that this is a team that could lose a lot of games. I think that you go through and you look at this list and you look at Florida's schedule. It's the most brutal. It's the most brutal in college football, and this is a team that's just going to be beat up by the time it gets to Georgia. Teams that would have faced before Georgia: Kentucky, Tennessee, UCF, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Stanford, Miami. It's going to be tough. And then after Georgia, it gets worse. So I think that this Florida team is going to be beat up. I think that there's too much drama with Billy Napier. I think that the idea that he's going to get fired, I feel like is probably just looming over the program's head. It feels like this is probably the last go-around with Billy Napier. Things don't look up, and they're just not going to look up. So I got Florida as the 9th toughest, right? The first of the big the really big name schools, right? Mississippi State being the 10th toughest. You move on to 8, and that's where I'm gonna put the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. This was a tough one for me. I was kind of shifting back and forth between two teams, and I end up going with Georgia Tech here. Tech is a program that's getting better. I think that Brent Key, what they're doing is working. You get the alum. More in a better sense, you get better players. And it starts with the quarterback. It starts with Haynes King. He was effective against Georgia last year, especially on the ground. You know that Georgia sometimes has struggled with quarterbacks that can really move their feet on the ground. They've done a good job in the transfer portal of just kind of recuperating talent. I think that another step forward for Georgia Tech could be another solid year. I think this is a bowl team for sure. It's just in Athens on senior day when you know that there's a good chance there are going to be some serious stakes for the Bulldogs. It could be making the SEC championship. It could be going 12-0. It could be this or that. I know that Georgia Tech can play Georgia tough. They played Georgia tough last year, but it was kind of a coin toss for me between these two games. I'm going with Georgia Tech as the 8th toughest opponent. At 7, I'm going to go with Auburn. I think that the Auburn will be the seventh toughest opponent for Georgia. This is coming our matchup. This is coming on October 5th. We know that over time, Auburn not only plays Georgia really tough, they play teams above them really tough. You see the Alabama game last year. You see the Georgia game last year. Auburn can make it interesting. More particularly, they can make it interesting in Jordan-Hare Stadium. It's not down there. The game will be in Athens this year. I do think that, another year of Hugh Freeze, another year of a quarterback in the system with Peyton Thorne, even though I don't think Peyton Thorne is all that great, and a lot of his statistics since Georgia came in a couple of chunk plays. So I think that, maybe the stats can tell you a little bit more of the story about what happened between Georgia and Auburn last year. But this is a defense I think is going to be really good again, and an offense in Georgia's that shouldn't have problems with Auburn when it's not in Jordan-Hare Stadium. So I'm going to go with them as the seventh toughest opponent. Number 6, right? Just missing the top 5. I think I'm going to go. This is one that I've kind of bounced back and forth with. I'm going to go with Kentucky as my 7th toughest opponent for Georgia right now. I think that transition with a new quarterback can be tough, especially when you're going to a new program with Brock Vandagriff. Heard a little bit about that the other day. I don't know how smoothly that transition's going. I think that Kentucky's a really good football program. I think that that's the best way to put it. They're a really good football program, and that's kind of it. It stops right there. And Georgia's kind of always had their number. This is early in the year. There's not going to be a weird weather situation where Georgia kind of just wants to sit on the ball. They're going to go up there and I think be able to beat Kentucky significantly. So I have Kentucky as the 7th toughest. All right, maybe let me make sure that we've got that around. Yeah, as the 7th toughest. I'm going to go with the 6th toughest being Clemson. So this list is getting interesting. Opening week, I think that 12.5-point line is just not enough. It's not. All right, neutral site, but it doesn't matter. It's Atlanta. I think that Georgia is significantly better. I don't think that there's really good players on this Clemson defense. A couple of them transferred away. A couple of them went to the draft. There are still really good players. The linebackers are legit. You think about Barrett Carter. Is Sammy Brown a guy from right down the road? Is he going to be a starter for Clemson? I just think that these programs aren't close at the moment, and I think that it's going to be more drastic than a 12.5-point spread, even if it's just 20 or 25. I just think that Georgia is going to beat Clemson pretty soundly. I watched Clemson's offense a lot last year. I watched them just struggle to move the ball against really good teams and defenses, and Georgia's going to have better than all of the ones that they struggled with last year. And I just didn't see a lot of things happen for Clemson in the offseason that tell me this is a program that's going to improve from the previous year. So I've got Clemson outside my top 5 toughest opponents for Georgia this year. 5, I'm going to go with Tennessee, partially because this is going to be later in the year. I think that Tennessee's going to be pretty solid. I think that I like what I've seen from Nico Iamaleava, and they've got a couple of really good defenders. This is a team that's largely staying the same. Some weapons that are staying the same. They've added some pieces. Running backs are not quite as good maybe, but they're still pretty good. And I just think that Georgia, after having to play Ole Miss, after having to play Florida, Texas, all those teams, it's going to be tough. Even though it'll be a home game, it's going to be tough. And this is, it's one that I debated. This stretch was the hardest to rank, was the Tennessee, Kentucky, Clemson stretch. And this is kind of how I feel right now based on everything we've learned. And number 4, the 4th toughest game for the Georgia Bulldogs. Who was it going to be? I actually misspoke. This would be the 3rd toughest game for Georgia. I'm going to go with the Ole Miss game. I think that Alabama and Ole Miss are probably around the same level of a team this year. I don't know. I think that they're both kind of top 10 teams, and that's how I feel about them. I don't think that either of them are necessarily legitimate playoff contenders. I think Ole Miss improved more in the offseason than Alabama did. It hurts Ole Miss if you lose to Judkins, but Alabama lost a little bit more. I think that Jalen Miller can have a good year, but there is transition with a coach. So I do favor Ole Miss as in some ways, but they just won't have the home field that Alabama does against Georgia. So I've got Alabama as the second toughest opponent, Ole Miss as the third. Very close, though. These were two that were very close for me. I think that it's a toss-up, really. I really do. Because I think that this Alabama team does take a little bit of a step back, yet remains really, really good. Ultimately, the reason why they're toughest is the mental aspect for Georgia. That's why. Getting over that hump with Alabama, is that gone now with Nick Saban gone? They just go over there to Tuscaloosa and take care of business. We're going to find that out pretty soon. Right? It'll be earlier on in the year. Toughest game, toughest opponent. It's the Texas Longhorns. They're up there right now. This is one of the handful of best teams in college football. They're going to have one of the best quarterbacks in college football. They've got sound weapons. They've got a solid defense. They've got one of the best coaches right now. They're a program that's on the rise, and they're going to be playing in Austin. They're going to be playing at home against Georgia. It's going to be a really tough matchup. Does this not tell you how tough of a schedule Georgia has? I just went through and ranked a really, really, really tough gauntlet. Now, final rankings: Texas, Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Clemson, Kentucky, Auburn, Florida, Mississippi State. I missed Georgia Tech in there, right? This is what you do when you don't make a graphic and have a list. But you see and you know how the cupcakes work at the end. Thanks for watching.